seconds.
But I
Perfect. That's it. Yeah,
Mhm.
at your own time, guys.
Oh, okay.
You can just leave it there. It's fine.
Mhm.
So you ready?
Yep.
Actually, no. That's actually a little bit in shot.
Mhm.
Yes, put it here. Perfect.
Mhm.
Right, well, I'll start by asking, how did you become a film critic and why?
I became film critic originally because I couldn't really get any other kind of work. I was one of those kids who just got interested in film. I came into it through genre. I was a kid who loved monster movies, and that expanded, from sort of being somebody who stayed up late on to watch Universal Hammer films. My interest kind of branched out from that into, looking at Gothic literature, but also just looking at films in general. And so, while I was a teenager, I started making little notes about every film I saw, keeping lists of films I saw. I mean, I assume many of us in the profession have a similar backstory, and I started writing for horror film fanzines when I was in my teens, and I did some stuff for music fanzines as well. And so, without being enormously prolific in the field, I had done enough film writing, and I sent some samples into the Monthly Film Bulletin, which is now absorbed into Sight and Sound. And I got one knockback saying, send us more stuff. And the second, and it was just, for me, it was a complete fluke, is that I understand even now, Sight and Sound has a unique review structure. The synopsis and then the review. Monthly Film Bulletin had that first. And I understand from talking to people in the magazine that almost nobody who writes to them looking for work bothers to submit samples that adhere to that structure, and it's actually impossible to tell whether you can write for Sight and Sound unless you can see what somebody's synopsis is like and then the review on top of that. And so I sat down and I wrote a couple of this is in 1982, and I wrote a couple of sample reviews in the style of the Monthly Film Bulletin. One was Mad Max 2, the last film I'd seen, and then I wrote a Monthly Film Bulletin type review of Last House on the Left, which had never been released in Britain but had played at the National Film Theatre in a season of extreme horror. And as it happened, my sample reviews arrived on the desk of Richard Coombs, who was the editor then, at exactly the same time as somebody gave him an interview with Wes Craven, and they were just starting to augment their theatrical reviews with the reviews of certain films that were only available on video, and Last House on the Left was one of those. So I got an acceptance letter back, not just commissioned for more work. They actually published my sample piece, and then from that I was sent to review Robert Voskanian's The Child, which came out here as Zombie Child, not actually a film I like rather more than I said in my review then. I've warmed up to it since then, but the thing that the MFB first sent me to a proper press show was The Evil Dead. And because that was a film that got a lot of attention, my review, which was one of the first to appear in print, got a bit of attention. It was the note that was handed out at the LFF screening of The Evil Dead. And that kind of established me as with whatever little kingdom I had, and I started doing those things. And on the strength of that, I started working for City Limits, which was a 1980s spin-off from and rival to Time Out, and I was one of their film critics for 6 or 7 years, and just on top of that, I started getting more work for other people. I started doing bits of broadcasting. I sold my first non-fiction book, Nightmare Movies, which came out in several editions in the 80s. And by the time I had sort of finished that book, I was able to sign off supplementary benefit, and B, making a living doing this. I've never actually had a staff job. I've never worked in anybody's office, and I've done lots of other things as well. And I have a parallel career as a fiction writer, and currently, I suppose my primary, film critic employers are Empire, Sight and Sound, and Screen Daily, and Front Row and Back Row on Radio 4.
And how long have you been writing for Empire?
Since it began, 1989.
So since the first.
Yeah, I am. Me and Angie Erigo are the only people who I think have been in every issue of Empire. My name actually isn't in issue 2, but I've got some unsigned video reviews in there.
Well, I guess we're gonna talk a little bit about what film criticism is, but
Yeah.
before we do that, let's just sort of establish what it isn't.
Mhm.
Are there any kind of popular misconceptions about film criticism or what a film critic does that you'd like to
Yeah, there are
address?
lots. I mean, civilians have literally no idea what we do. I think maybe because a few film critics have been slightly more voluble about the conditions of our work, which are things that only we are interested in. There is no real reason why anybody who's not a film critic would care. Because maybe we have slightly more of a sense. I mean, a lot of people ask you things like, do you go and do you get special screenings, or do you do you go to the premieres? It's like, I think I've been to 3 premieres in over 30 years as a film critic, and most of those sort of by accident. Yeah, but that's something that, as it were, regular people tend to assume you do all the time. The basic mechanics of, you negotiate with commissioning editors and distributors, and the whole business of press screenings, press notes, what you actually write, whether it's you who respond to the invites or the editor who commissions you, all this kind of nuts and bolts stuff. I don't think anyone outside the business concerns themselves with, nor should they. I mean, it's like I'm not particularly interested in the working conditions of people in other businesses. I mean, occasionally I suppose that they're slightly interesting. There is obviously the image of all types of criticism which is fostered in the media, because you got to remember, most fictional representations of critics are created by people who've got a grudge to bear. So that's why you have characters like George Sanders in All About Eve, or the theatre critics who get murdered in Theatre of Blood, or those kind of sort of caricatures of waspy, nasty people who get their enjoyment from destroying the lives or whatever. Which at once it's rather flattering, because it indicates a power that I'm not sure critics outside maybe 1 or 2 New York theatre critics have. Remember Lindsay Duncan in Birdman last year? That's still, all these years on from Sheridan Whiteside in The Man Who Came to Dinner, that's still what most creative people think critics are like. And it's really hard. I cannot, off the top of my head, think of any fictional representation of a critic that resembles in any way anybody I know, except in that there is a certain superficial resemblance of some of the attitudes that are in Theatre of Blood are quite like some of the attitudes you hear in the real critic circle. Yeah.
Although, of course, we're all like Michael Fassbender in Glorious Bastards.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but even I suppose it's really hard to think, who is he supposed to be? Gavin Lambert? I don't know. And then there's a sort of difference between criticism and reviewing, and for me, reviewing is sort of a combination of being entertaining and giving consumer advice. It's you ask your reader is asking, should I go and see this film this weekend or whatever, and your job is to express your opinion of the film in such a way that people who agree with you will realise that they agree with you and will then follow your advice, but also that people who don't agree with you will know that and know not to go and see a film that you like. And then there's criticism, which to me is much more conversational. It's much more the assumption I always have, writing for Sight and Sound, for instance, is that you're writing for people who are quite likely to have seen the film already and just want to talk about it, and want to, the sort of going to the pub afterwards, throwing ideas back and forth. And sometimes that means that you've got sort of deep history criticism where you are not just dealing with stuff that's out in cinemas at the moment. You're looking back at the whole history of cinema, either at the classics of cinema, or I'm very interested in genre, and that sort of I have a kind of, I suppose, social history approach to it. I find it interesting to see the way that basically the same stories are told over and over and over again, and what that means for what we as a society are interested in or worried about or scared of at the time we're making a whole bunch of, I don't know, range war westerns in the 1950s, or Japanese monster movies in the 60s. Well, there are all kinds of things. And again, that you can easily caricature this as an approach. That the thing that every critic hates is when someone says you're reading too much into it. It's like, well, the answer to which is you're clearly not reading anything into it. Yeah.
Within all of this, what do you regard as the most... and the one thing you haven't really mentioned, except for, I guess, what you're calling reviews, is evaluation, by which I mean assessing whether a film is good or bad.
Yeah.
How important an aspect of criticism do you think that is? Do you think it's completely unimportant, or that it has its place, but you...
The notion of good or bad is one of those things I'm really uncomfortable with. I'm happier with ideas. I think I tend to look at a polarity of interesting and dull rather than good or bad. Entertaining and boring is a maybe that's a much more audience-friendly way of approaching it. The trouble is when you say that sort of inevitably people misunderstand what you're saying, and they translate it into an opposition between car chases, explosions, fun stuff, and glacial art movies. So I find, for instance, Michael Bay's films really boring, and I find Shane Carruth's films really entertaining. That's me. Many people may not share that opinion, but to me that's a valid one. I think you have a responsibility if you're writing that kind of review, that your reader, who is going to have to, after all, pay to see a film you saw for free, should come away with some sense of whether it's going to be worth their while. The thing is, and this is something that again I think isn't often enough appreciated, is if you're interested in cinema, if you're interested in culture, quite often it behooves you to go and see films you don't really like, that may stretch you or challenge you. Or sometimes I think, it's important to go and see, I don't know, big trashy pot-boiling blockbusters. Anything that has some huge connection with the audience. Usually there has to be something interesting going on in there. Not always, but usually there's something. Films, wouldn't be big cultural phenomena if there wasn't something there. I'm still not in the business of handing down, stone tablet judgments. Considering the title of this project, I'm very anti-star ratings, which I think everybody... there are still many people in the business who obsess over it. I actually find... I went through that thing. I first saw star ratings in those movies on TV books that Leonard Maltin edited, or Stephen Shore, I think, was the guy who did the first one I saw. And they had little capsule reviews of films, and they used star ratings. But between editions, the star ratings would sometimes go up or down as things were reassessed. I remember one in particular, in I think it's Stephen Shore rather than Leonard Maltin, gave Kiss Me Deadly 2 stars in one edition and then rethought it as 4 stars. Quite right, yeah. I can see that you could have looked at that film and thought, oh, it was just a failure at being a hard-boiled film noir that had become ridiculous. And then later on you look at it again and think, oh, no, that's exactly what he meant. It's an attempt to inflate film noir into its sort of absurd heights. But that allows for the notion of flux. I think the other thing is, of course, and I did this as well. When I wrote up my little notes about movies when I was a kid, I would put star ratings next to them. And when I was about 20, I just stopped. I just thought, this is stupid. I don't believe it. I would look back at things I'd seen 3 years ago and I'd either loved or hated and realised I'd completely changed my opinion. And that whatever, it was sort of useful as a way of reminding me what I felt, but that didn't translate to what you feel or anybody else feels. And it's like, you can, I don't know, you can put 5 stars on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre as much as you want. There are still some people out there who are never going to watch it, and if they did, would hate it. And you have to respect that. There are things out there that mean an enormous amount to other people that I really don't care about. And there's no way, I mean, I can put a 1-star rating on Gone with the Wind or 50 Shades of Grey or whatever. If you're a fan of those things, my opinion literally doesn't matter. We can then debate it, but yeah.
But in that case, given that you must write for publications that occasionally call upon you
oh,
to
absolutely,
provide,
yeah.
star
Well,
ratings,
what I have done is I usually give advisory star ratings. I basically, if no one else in the office has seen them, I'll say, here's my review. That's the thing I've concentrated on. I think this falls into what you would call a 2, 3, 4, whatever. But also, if they want to change it, that's fine by me. I would rather they weren't there. The fact that we have to spend 95% of our time arguing about asterisks rather than films is a problem for film culture. Look at the comment sections under any reviews online that use star ratings, and all they do is split hairs about, oh, this should have been a 3 rather than a 2, or this should be a 4 rather than 3. Yeah, seriously, what you should do is come to grips with the movie, not the asterisks.
Thank you. That's perfect. Moving on to a completely different subject. I wonder how has film criticism changed since you started? Like, what are the big shifts that there've been in the...
I suppose academic things have changed over the years. I mean, when I began, structuralism was a really big buzzword, and everyone was, reading Levi-Strauss and all that kind of stuff and trying to bring that to film. And we sort of got away from that. I actually think there's still some quite interesting approaches there, and there was a lot of feeling that you had to spend a lot of time on theory, where you would the big movie magazine of the 70s, Screen, would have whole issues where they were proud of never mentioning a single film, and it's that again is something that is quite easy to caricature, and I think we've moved away from that in that particular style. Certainly we've had the rise of online as a source. We've had the rise of, actually, star ratings have now kind of predominated. Lots of publications that didn't used to run them do. I think we've had the decline of the seigneurial newspaper columnist as an ultimate arbiter. When the Independent started, which I think is something like 1985, 86, they were the first newspaper to do that thing of having their lead critic, I think it was Adam Mars-Jones at first, do just a big review of whatever was the big film that came out that week, and then have other critics. I was one for a while, but then Sheila Johnston I think sort of came to dominate, review everything else, but in little separate sections. So newspapers sometimes started reviewing films on their own rather than in roundups. That's actually something they probably took from Time Out, City Limits, The Enemy, that kind of thing. Yeah, which were the publications I was more likely working for. That seemed to be a sort of a younger, hipper approach to concentrate on the film rather than this week's films. Right. And then there are all the bad things that have happened, which is it's become much harder to get paid. There's the sort of notion that you're competing with people who post on IMDb barely literate screeds from people who probably haven't seen the films, or if they have, are not bringing. Actually, I'm sure if you dig through it, there are some really smart people doing that. Probably really smart kids until they realise that they're signing away the rights to everything just by posting, and then they think, there's a rise of lots of people doing stuff on blogs. Again, mostly the equivalent of me in my bedroom writing little notes after seeing Hammer films on television. But now you can share that with the world, whether you want that around you for the rest of your life, or whether you have the terrible thing of you want to monetize this and find you're competing with your previous free persona. I think it's much harder to survive as a film critic. It's outside of one or two newspaper and broadcast gigs, it's not really a profession anymore. The idea of being a freelance film critic and nothing else. There were never that many of us, but there was a point in the 80s and 90s where I'd go to a screening, there'd be about 20 or 30 people who were just sort of freelancers floating between working for the various publications. There are fewer and fewer of those now. I personally don't have the patience for podcasts. Yeah, there's too many other things somehow commanding my time. But again, that seems to be an interesting way of approaching things. But then again, it strikes me that podcasts are almost they're slightly decadent forms of radio. Right, yeah, and I've done a lot of criticism of radio, and it's a medium I really like. But it seems to me that podcasts are under-resourced radio. Sometimes you have really interesting voices there and people saying stuff, but without an actual anchor or a slot or something to push it, I think people are finding that it's an inordinate amount of work for the return, and so you have a lot of short-lived podcasts. Yeah, that people get fed up with doing it after a while.
Do you think that the film criticism in print form is in its death throes, or do you think it's going to be around for?
I think it'll survive. I think because there'll be a rump of it. It still serves a useful function for the film industry, and I think it serves a useful function for the culture. I get sort of impatient when you hear people say that it's not needed anymore because these days you can just go on YouTube and see trailers or all that kind of stuff. It says, well, if you want to cut out one of the few parts of the system that gives you, as it were, non-sponsored, non-mediated engagement with movies, then you are asking for a system where all you're going to get is the Transformers movies. Yeah, it's like those are movies that don't need critics, and in fact wouldn't want good reviews anyway, because that would sort of bring them down a bit. But if you care about movies, if you like what people now laughably call indie cinema, it's like, who's going to tell you about these things? If you like, I'm trying to think of it off the top of my head, Convergence, right? Who's going to tell you that's good? Yeah, it's just us. We're the only ones here who will do that. Word of mouth and festival screenings, all that kind of stuff. But the distributors want us to see it. They want us to like these things and to tell the people out there that we do. And so we have more and more voices that are capable of doing that. but people still need to have a sense of somebody that they will take advice from.
But do we need to be in print for that? Why can't...
I would argue yes, because it's broadcast, podcast, whatever, talking off the top of my head, like I'm doing now, is still a more superficial way of addressing anything than even one of those really brief capsule reviews, 100-word review or whatever, that's considered can still, to me, encapsulate and hit home more than 5 minutes of waffle and hey, you should go and see this, mofos,
Sorry, I think but what I mean is by print I mean like press as opposed to print online. So
right, yeah. Well, no, I mean press. Yeah, I think that there is still a certain cachet, and I would actually argue that that's now extended to a certain amount of online stuff as well. That we're seeing a changing ecology online between the stuff that is that commands attention and the stuff that your eyes skitter away from, and often it's just presentational, and often it is simply the things that one of the really underappreciated jobs in this business is the commissioning editor, the reviews editor, and most online stuff doesn't even have that. Maybe the sites that really work are the ones that do have that, where somebody is thinking this would be good for, or we would like to hear what you think about this, or this writer thinks about this, or here's an issue, and there is a sense not that so much online stuff is just self-generated and self-starting, and in the end it seems only you're only talking to yourself and your 5 friends or whatever, which is still a valuable thing to do.
You see as the future, this is a crystal ball question, but the future for film criticism, and more specifically for the professional film critic, the paid film critic?
For the paid film critic, I think it's going to get even harder than it has been for a while. I think the national press is musical chairs, isn't it? It's like every once in a while they change the chairs, stop the music, fire someone and take a chair away, and also and this has been true for a while, the people who run newspaper arts pages are fighting cuts in their space or whatever, and also there is a kind of rising tide of, do we need somebody who actually knows about films to write about films? But this which is something no one would ever say, well, couldn't we just have somebody who sort of likes ballet to go and be our ballet critic, as opposed to somebody who knows about ballet? But because film is a popular art, and that said, the state of film criticism is so much better than the state of television criticism, considering how vast and important that is as a medium, and how it's almost impossible to find anything like intelligent criticism of television anywhere. It's only covered in newspapers, so it can be laughed at. And the most and people are saying there's really demanding, interesting, intelligent work being done on television now, which is true. It's just nobody's able to write about that in any but the most superficial, fannish terms. So that's going to happen more and more. I don't know. There's other gloom. It's getting harder and harder to be paid for any kind of creative work, and criticism, I think, is creative work. Writing is creative work, whatever you address it to. It's probably getting harder and harder to be paid as a gardening correspondent, despite all you put into it. I think that's a bad thing. I think that I'm seeing the slow extinction of the field that I've spent quite a lot of my life in, and that many people very close to me and dear to me have. People whose lives matter, whose careers matter, whose sort of position in the culture has been beneficial. That said, there won't be many tears shed because nobody likes critics. Yeah, it's because it's always easy to do jokes about them, isn't it? Yeah, and it's like various things over the years have happened where I mean, you're a member of the critic circle too, where we've been in what in any other business would be thought of as like industrial disputes, and whenever we let the crack out and basically tell people what's going on, the overwhelming response is good. They deserve to suffer. Yeah. Why should? Yeah. And some of this may be envy. There is a thought that, hey, it's a really great job, isn't it? Yeah, just going and seeing movies. Yeah. Why? Yeah. Why should you have a good time as well? Why should you have decent working conditions? Yeah. And yeah, actually get paid the money that the editor said they'd pay you, or the publication said they'd pay you. There is literally no sympathy for any of our problems in the kind of workaday world. If I don't know, there are people out there who would, or generally people would care about the way waiters are treated or nurses are treated, and I'm not equating what we do with that as well, but people would who feel that what we do isn't really a job, so therefore we shouldn't have the benefits that go with employment, even freelance employment. And freelance employment is really dodgy anyway, anyway, because even unions don't really trust freelancers because they think of us as scabs. We're taking away somebody's job just by existing. And so there are very few people arguing for us. And so we have the critic circle arguing for us, and they don't really argue for freelancers either, do they? They're mainly concerned with people who have positions on newspapers. That's always what their primary focus has been. Not necessarily, because basically the only thing that changes is a paycheck. I think there is a certain quality control there. It's like a professional critic, you can usually assume meets certain minimal standards of ethics, which is to say they only review films they've seen. Right. Yeah, I mean that's the first thing. And there is a thought that they don't just look at the movie, they look at its context, where it is in even in the industrial context or in the careers of the people involved or whatever. And that maybe because professional critics have a certain complicity in the business, we have kind of a stake in it. The things you can get a lot of attention by being really iconoclastic and hating everything. But it's easier to do that if you don't actually bother to see the work. And there are professional writers who I wouldn't call professional critics who have done that, who find the easiest thing is just to tear stuff down. A lot of the amateur stuff strikes me as going that way, although most of the people who are sort of, I suppose, amateur film critics are essentially, if they're serious about it, on their way to being professional film critics. They may not be a field to join at the end of it, but certainly that's kind of how I felt when I was working for fanzines, that I was trying to bring at least minimal standards to it, and the other thing I tried to do was work hard on the prose, make that interesting as well as what the ideas, as well as or the opinion, is to make something that was a good read. That said, there are all kinds of forms of professional criticism or film writing now, which are basically copywriting, isn't it? Listicles or whatever, those kind of things, sidebars, which I've done too. But and those things can be relatively interesting or entertaining or amusing or whatever, but it's not what I would think of as criticism.
And my last question isn't really a question at all. It's
Yeah.
just there's lots of things that we've addressed, but I'm sure there. Well, I'm not sure, but there might be something that you feel we haven't addressed. Is there anything that you want to get off your chest about film criticism or film critics or the life? Or
No, not really. I mean, apart from anything else, it's still an enviable way to live in many. Yeah, there are aspects of it which are genuinely very pleasant, and I know, and the things we complain about a lot of it. Yeah, it is that thing where people say, "Oh, 15 films out this week," and it is, and actually it is difficult if I don't have to do that, see everything right away. But I understand that the sheer weight of numbers of movies, and I do a column where I have to watch a lot of stuff. Just finding the time to fit it all into your life and to give everything the attention that it deserves is difficult. Yeah. One sort of thing I've noticed over the years is that most criticism that comes out of the Cannes Film Festival is useless because the people writing it are shell-shocked. And now you've got the pressure on people to sort of halfway through the film to tweet the reaction to it. And often it's, people will see something at Cannes while in an altered state of perception, some kind of notice, and then a month later see it again and see so much more in it because they can pay attention to it. Film festivals are a very bad way of paying attention, particularly to really demanding serious films. If you've watched 5 in a day during an endless bacchanal.
Okay, thank you very, very much indeed.
That's all right.
I don't know if you had any
No further question from my side.
Okay.
I think it's
Perfect.
been incredible,
Yeah,
actually.
thank you very, very much
All
indeed,
right.
and we're really sorry to have
That's all right.
you're ill and we were late
Yeah.
and everything
Yeah.
else.
Right. Who else are you talking to?
Today, nobody. You're the last. But well, I mean, we've now I think interviewed 33 people. We're hoping to interview 50. And it's I mean it's it's a cross section. It's freelancers like yourself, newspaper journalists, some bloggers, just to kind of get an overall sense of the landscape. Yeah.
Have you tried interviewing somebody who just posts on the IMDb?
Well, I wouldn't really know how, so I wouldn't know how to approach them.
That was one of my questions, and I
don't know who they are.
No, well, because I suppose they don't use their real names, do they? And it's just, I was thinking, if the internet had been around when I was like 14 or 15, that's what I would have done. Every time I would have seen a film, I would have posted the note that I made. Yeah.
But the other thing,
but I would then not have the rights to all that stuff.
But my problem is this,
which people don't get, that you're signing away your rights to it, because they don't think that those rights are useful. And one of the things that, I mean, at the moment I'm doing a book of kind of related to my Empire column, where I'm recycling all kinds of things that I've written over like 40 years into a book. And I can do that because I have the rights to do it. But if I'd posted stuff for free on the IMDb, or if I'd worked for many other kind of weird online sources that do a rights grab, I wouldn't be able to do this.
It's a problem though, because there is really no other outlet available to quite a lot of people that will otherwise contribute to IMDb. And I mean, unless you foresee a future for yourself in film writing, you've got to take any door that you can that's open, I suspect, when you're starting. I think it's now, we have to take it for granted that we are going to be writing for free when we start.
Yeah, and that said, I mean, a really simple thing is, if you're a kid and your impulse is to put, every time you see a film, put a review on the IMDb, get a WordPress blog, put it up there, and then submit the links to the IMDb. Therefore, you retain the rights, and you're there under external reviews with everybody else.
Yeah, and it's yours because it's your blog.
Yeah.
But also for a lot of people that seems an insurmountable amount of effort. It's not, but
well, yeah. I suppose it is now. Maybe kids today have got past blogging as a thing, but it used to be that everybody would do it. Yeah. But actually, one thing the rise of social media has taken that away, hasn't it? Because it's so much easier just to put it on Facebook or tweet it.
What are the right situation with that? If you put something on Facebook, presumably you do kind of own it. Or...
You kind of own it. The paranoids will tell you that Facebook takes all kind of rights, but but mostly people worry about their photographs. And the thing is, Facebook do say if you post a photograph to Facebook, they have the right to do some things with it. But that's the only right they want is for other people to be able to look at it, which is what you've posted it there for in the first place. But there are people who get really sort of conspiracy movie paranoid about that and say that Facebook are going to take all your photographs and sell them to kiddie porn sites or whatever. But
we have a kind of like an ethical problem, which is partly what's stopping us trying to reach out for IMDb reviews. In that, while in many ways it would be quite attractive to have a really bad critic, as I don't want to ridicule people. So I just because I don't think it's going to be very productive. So it's you're doing us a favour by being.
I don't know who the. I mean, do we have really bad critics in Britain anymore?
Well, if you're talking about people who write for IMDb,
but
so I think, but I mean, I guess they're not. Do we call them critics? I don't know.
Well, it's still writing about film, isn't it? I think not, because it's sort of innocent of any idea of intent. It is just people expressing their opinions, and again, that's a kind of an idiot description of what a critic is. It's not what a critic actually is. I suppose there are people who, because I don't see tabloid newspapers, but there are people who are like the film critic of The Sun and The Mirror, who write 25 words on whatever, but the thing is, I don't even think that is criticism. I think a lot of them don't even do it.
I'm not interested in the interview. That's sort of awful, but...
I don't even. I mean, I'm not sure that what the kind of criticism you see in the Mail or the Express even counts. Although they used to have actual critics who would turn up and pay attention. I think those newspapers have kind of culled, their specialists and just send, the idiot office boy out to do that now, or hire somebody off Towie. It's like. Who then has to have their stuff ghosted, but that's happened before.
And I mean, it would be very interesting to hear the views of also fanboys. I mean, that's the other group where we discussed an interest in them,
but there is fan criticism, which is sort of I mean, particularly TV stuff. But the trouble, I mean, when I wrote the BFI book on Doctor Who, I read a lot of other stuff about the show, and it'd all been written by Doctor Who fans, and they'd done a lot of interesting scholarship, and a lot of them were very kind of opinionated, but they were writing from within the culture. There were things that they were they had mental blocks almost on things that I would say about something from outside, that once you become a fan,
do you ever perceive that to be a problem with yourself about horror, for example?
No, actually, because I think that I have enough of a separation. There are. I mean, I still regard myself as a fan of all kinds of things, but when you sit down and write about something or pay attention to something, I think a switch flicks,
right.
And I've had even people nag me about, can't you ever just turn off and watch a film? Do you get that? So that, and the answer is no. And can you? And the idea of just sitting there and letting I don't even the most I know, My Little Pony or something. There is something there, and you start thinking about it or feeling it or wondering why it does stuff. I think that's, but I feel the same about almost anything.
The only equivalent I can think of to switching off is if it's late at night and I sit down and watch something that I know I'm not going to be reviewing and I'm just watching because it's before I go to sleep. I won't remember it 2 weeks later.
Yeah, that's right. But
I won't remember the title.
But because I got in this thing when I was a kid, every time I see a film, I make some notes about it, no matter how nonsensical. So if I watch a rom-com on an aeroplane, I will write 250 words on it at some point.
Do you do that? So I was going to say, do you do that immediately or like?
Usually within a day or so. In fact, because I've been busy this week, I've got about like 8 titles that I should, scribble some notes on at some point. But the thing is, most of this stuff does. I mean, with this book I'm doing, I will actually use a lot of those notes. But it is that thing you never know in another 20 years when you've consciously forgotten something and you have to write a movies on TV column or something.
Because I by habit, when I watch films, I mean, this is just my own process, and it's kind of everyone has their own, but I take ridiculously copious notes.
I do it the other way. I stopped taking notes while a film is on, but I try and make notes about everything, say within usually within a day, sometimes within a few days. And particularly during festivals where you need to keep that stuff straight. Because otherwise, I suppose what I'm trying to avoid is having to watch things again later that I didn't really like the first time round in order to it's like I did the Sight and Sound review of Wormwood, which I saw on a Screener link last year, and I had to watch that again to do the synopsis. I had enough notes to write a review, but it was his sister, not his girlfriend he was trying to rescue, all that kind of stuff. I couldn't have done that without watching it again, and I kind of resented it. I sort of sat there watching this thing for a second, and not that I hated it or anything, but watching it for a second time just to fix the synopsis in my head.
But in an ideal world, I mean, I guess in a sense you've already answered this question, but in an ideal world, would you watch a film twice before committing yourself to a critique?
Not most films, some films. I did that BFI Sight and Sound book on science fiction and fantasy, and one of the things I reprinted was Philip Strick's review of 2001, which was like written the afternoon after he'd seen it in 1968. Imagine 10 o'clock in the morning, you sit and watch 2001, a film you've heard nothing about except that it's this big science fiction thing, and then in the afternoon he wrote a 1,500 word piece on it, which is brilliant. It's one of the best pieces on the film, and it's like, I really admire that people, but I'm sure there are plenty of reviews written under those circumstances that would haunt people for the rest of their lives. And when I told whoever, I think it was Ed Lawrenson was the commissioning editor at Sight and Sound at the time about that, and he said that he felt like that about my review of Mulholland Drive. So it's like, well, that's nice. But again, that I saw that the next day, got up, wrote review, turn it in, and that is the kind of thing that I don't think I've got any of those reviews written under circumstances like that I'm just really cringingly ashamed of. But when you're given something that is that demanding, and you have to write something about it, and particularly a Sight and Sound piece, which requires a level of involvement, which is, I mean, I still think it's one of the most important forms of criticism that is available to us, is the Sight and Sound review that forces you to come to grips with a film. Maybe Video Watchdog, which I also work for, does. And I think we need more outlets like that.
It always feels the most challenging. Sight and Sound. And there's also the sense that because it's a publication of record, the sense that you're writing for posterity and not just for the consumer guy.
You do know that in 20 years' time, people will be looking it up. I mean, I remember when I was doing sort of monthly film books and stuff in the 80s, there was that great realization that what you said about The Party Animal or Spring Break or The House on Sorority Row was the review people would be looking at forever. It was you and Variety, were the touchstones of that, and that's a kind of responsibility.